Hi, this is Marina from Frocks Frolics, and I'm going to show you how you can attach a waistband for an elastic to a pair of jogger bottoms. What do you do if your fabric is really, really thick? Well, maybe you don't want to have the entire seam at the waistline pointing into one direction. And if you don't want to do that, there's one really easy solution for that. You can work it the traditional way, and that's what I'm going to show you here. We're going to have our seams nice and flat, and also I'm using a waistband that's a little bit wider, so everyone that's already made my Bubble Gum Joggers will love this too. So let's get started. To get the perfect measurement for your waistband, regardless of what you are making, you want to add a little bit of movement room to the width of your elastic. So if it's 3 centimeters, then it would be 3.3 plus 2 centimeters for the seam allowance. That would be then 5.3 width, and the length should be just whatever the length is of the thing that you are making. I've already made the jogger bottoms, of course, and I'm just showing you the waistband here. So we are taking our waistband that we've prepared, and we're going to close it at the shorter edge with a centimeter seam allowance. And like everything that needs to be gathered afterwards anyway, you do not need a special stitch like a zigzag or an elasticated stitch, triple stitch. You don't need it. And then we iron the seam apart, and we'll mark the center back. And here you can see the pocket and how thick that is if you now would turn that in, especially if you also got the elastic in there. So for these really heavy fabrics like mine here, this is a really good method. I'm also marking the center front of my waistband and now the center front of my joggers. And all I have to do now is put my waistband over and sew it together with the right sides facing. So seam onto center back, and then I'm going to pin this all the way around. And again, when I'm sewing this on, I will not need any special stitch for that, but you should work with a stretch needle which has a little bit of a rounder tip so that it doesn't leave out any stitches, it doesn't create holes in your fabric, and it will go through. Now we're going to turn the jogger bottom, so we're working from the inside. That is really important. Always do that. The other way around would be so much harder. 1 centimeter seam allowance as per usual. All the way around. And the next step now will be to iron the seam into the waistband and also overlock or serge the top edge. And I'm doing it from the right hand side simply because I didn't want to turn it again to the other side because we need that side anyway. So I'm just going to press it. Never make more work for yourself than you have to. Brilliant stuff. There we go, almost done. Now the elastic I'm using is a sports elastic, or at least I thought that's what I was going to use, but then my friend said she likes wider elastic, so last minute decision I decided to put a wider elastic in, and therefore I had very, very little room. And as I've just said, you really do need some movement room. Measure your elastic as indicated on any pattern that you're using. If you're using mine, of course it's in there as well. And then when we pull this down and we look at it, we need to make sure that we've got this little bit of movement room. Now, the overlocking ideally would sit on the other side of your stitching line so that you've got plenty there and it doesn't slip off. In my case, I had like 2 millimeters, which wasn't enough, of course, because it changed the width of my elastic. But it worked just by the skin of my teeth. I was lucky. And now we're going to turn the trousers and we're going to sew in the ditch all the way around, but we do have to leave an opening, of course, because we're going to put the elastic in. The other option is you could leave an opening in the center back when you join that. That's also possible, of course, especially if, say, you're making something for your grandchildren and they live in Florida and you live in California, then you might want to do that, because that way you can leave it open and mum can then make the elastic tighter or a little bit looser if she likes, and then close it by hand herself. Make sure that you use your hands to pull the fabric apart so that you really are stitching in the ditch here. And when that's done, we're almost done. I'm pulling out my pins because I didn't want any loops underneath it, but you could in theory leave them in. Look at that, brilliant. Mine was so close to the edge, you want really a little bit more. Put a safety pin in your elastic and start threading it through. When you thread it through, make sure that the seam allowance sits on the inside of the elastic, so that when you're looking from the outside, it's nice and flat. When you come to the other side, you pull your elastic through, and one of the main rules for elastic is don't create a seam where you have got more bulk. You want to just overlap them. In my case, I'm doing 2 centimeters, and you sew 2 stitching lines so that you're just catching each one of the edges, and that gives you a very flat finish. There we go. Hold it between your fingers and down you go. Cut off your threads, let it slip in, stretch it a bit so the elastic is evenly distributed, and then also you want to make sure that that seam allowance really sits to the inside, and I'm doing that here. I'm just making sure it sits in very well. As you can see, mine is really tight, but that's only because I changed my mind just when I had started. And we're done. I hope you enjoyed this little bonus video for my jogger bottoms, and if you want to get the original pattern, you can do that on frocksandfrolics.com or academy.frocksandfrolics.com, where you find the whole sewing course and lots of other things as well. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.